Thank you all for being here. I know you probably could be at home in your garden, but the fact that you're here, I appreciate it. And I'm going to be talking about saving seeds. So a brief overview of my talk is I'm going to go over the benefits of seed saving, a little bit about the anatomy of the seed. I'm not going to get too technical with that, just to point out that there are two different types of seeds. Then we're going to talk about open pollinated versus heirloom versus hybrid versus GMO or genetically modified seeds. And then the types of pollination and the importance of actually choosing an open pollinated seed for saving as compared to the others. And then we'll get into what seeds to save and how to save them. And then at the end I'll have some resources and there'll be a brief question and answer period. So, why should you save seeds when you can go to the store and buy them? They're not all that expensive depending on the types of seeds you're buying. You usually are guaranteed that they're fresh, so they're ready for that season. And most stores, even grocery stores, sell seeds now. But I'm going to convince you that saving them is actually better. So why should you save seeds? There are a number of reasons why you should save seeds. One is regional adaptation. So you have a flower, an herb, or a vegetable that is growing really, really well in your garden. So you want to maybe next year have another flower, herb, or vegetable grow really, really well in your garden. Well, you can take the seeds from that plant that you observed did very well and probably push the chances of repeating that by taking the seeds from that particular plant. It's also a great way to preserve heritage and biodiversity. I like to grow hot peppers, not because I can eat hot peppers, I can't, but they're absolutely gorgeous and they're fun to grow. What I like to do is get heirloom hot peppers that have been lost in the past, but some seeds have been rediscovered and people are intentionally growing them, and there's a lot of times a story behind them. Some of the peppers I grow were grown in the South by African Americans, and it became a part of their culture, and they're continually growing these as a way of preserving their culture. Seeds can tell stories, so that's another good reason. So money saving as well. It doesn't really cost you anything to save a seed, and that saves you from having to go out and buy it. Quality. By saving seeds from plants that you know have grown well in your little microenvironment, you're maintaining a consistent quality, because you'll know that they'll hopefully maintain that quality from one generation to the next. Nutrition, because better quality equals better nutrition. And finally, because it's fun. It's one thing that you can do as you're cleaning up your garden at the end of the season is save some of those seeds before getting rid of the plants. This is a little quote that I found that I thought was really apropos. Seeds carry life from generation to generation without end. Through the seeds speak the voices of the ancestors. Each time we plant a seed, we become ancestors for the generations to come. So, a little bit about seed anatomy. There are two types of seed. There's a monocot and a dicot. And a monocot, an example of that is a corn kernel, will have an endosperm, suctellum, plumule, and an embryo. And then you have the common bean, which is a dicot, and it has an embryo, a seed coat, and a cotyledon. And from that little seed, you get these wonderful plants. So what is amazing to me is that you can take a seed that is as small as a poppy seed. This is a leek seed right here. And you can get this. I pulled this from my garden this morning. This is an American flag. And I grow these to make soup. If I'm lucky, I can also grow potatoes. My potatoes did horrible this year, so I'll have to buy potatoes, but I like making potato leek soup, and I use these leeks. I also dry them so I can use them throughout the season. This is about the average size of the leek that I grow, from a little seed like that. So it's amazing to me that that tiny little speck has all the information, all it needs to create a plant. I'm totally blown away by that. year after year. So let's talk a little bit about open pollinated seeds versus heirloom seeds versus hybrid versus GMO. I'm sure these are all terms that are familiar to you, and I think we need to make some distinctions about what they mean so we can be knowledgeable when we're picking our seeds, especially when we decide what plants we want to use for saving seeds. So an open pollinated plant, open pollination occurs via natural mechanisms. So think of the bee that runs around, flies around from plant to plant, or the wind. And each generation is usually true to type. What that means is you have the first generation, the second generation is going to be identical or almost identical to the first generation. Not all plants are capable of open pollination. But what's really good about them is they're genetically diverse and they're very stable. An heirloom is a plant that has been passed down from generation to generation. You know how I talked about seeds telling a story for a particular culture? Well, they have passed those seeds down from generation to generation. It must be open pollinated in order to be considered heirloom. However, not all open pollinated seeds are heirlooms. A hybrid is a plant that's created from seeds resulting from controlled cross-pollination with the desire to reproduce certain characteristics. So successive generations may or may not be true to type. So daughter or son seed is not going to, plant is not going to necessarily look like its mother. They're usually, when you're buying seeds, they're usually labeled as F1 on the package. That's a clue that that is a hybrid seed. Hybridization can also occur naturally, but it is genetically unstable, meaning that the successive generations are not going to be true to type, true to the first one. Now, I'm sure you've all heard of GMO or genetic modification. It's kind of been thrown around as kind of this scary term. So those are plants that are derived from the genetic manipulation of the insertion of one or more genes. So that's not just crossbreeding plants. That's actually going in and changing it genetically. A good example of this is some of the corn that is grown for mass production. They'll maybe insert a gene of BT. I don't know the actual name of BT, but it's a common occurring organism that helps ward off certain pests. So they've actually will genetically modify the corn plant to have these characteristics, and then you get more corn. So many of these are of GMO modified plants are patented. So you can't really share those seeds for that, or you'll be. I actually discovered that in the state of Ohio, it is a misdemeanor to actually share seeds. Now, we do it all the time, and it's rarely enforced. And I believe there is a bill pending in the legislature whenever they come back that was passed by the House. It needs to be considered by the Senate to change these laws. And the emphasis for the change of these laws are people who want to encourage people to share milkweed seeds so we can beef up and help the monarch butterfly population. So the takeaway from this is open pollination does not necessarily mean heirloom, but heirloom does mean open pollination. Hybrids are not openly pollinated, and hybrids do not mean GMO. So let's talk a little bit about pollination. There are types of pollination. There's self-pollination, and that's where a flower will contain both the male and the female parts, and it can fertilize itself. A bean is an example of this, a bean seed. Pollen is transferred from the stigma or the stamens to the same flower or another flower on the same plant. So we have beans, peppers, lettuce, peas, and tomatoes are all self-pollinating. Then there's cross-pollination. And that usually needs the help of insects or wind, not necessarily just bees. There are certain flies and butterflies that are also pollinators. And pollen is transferred from the anther of one plant to the stigma of the other plant. Some plants produce male and female flowers on the same actual plant. A squash is an example of that. So examples of cross-pollinating vegetables: corn, cucumber, melon, squash, beet, and cabbages and broccoli, carrot, onion, and radish. And my little leek right here. So pollination methods by plant. I think I already talked a little bit about some of them, but here's another list of what the different pollination methods. So when we are picking a plant in order for saving seeds, it's important to choose an open pollinator, especially an heirloom, over a hybrid. And I talked about that genetic instability and how the F1 will be, the F2 will not necessarily be the same as the F1. And you can see here there's a cross between two characteristics, and the first generation is going to be what you want, but the second generation you're going to probably get some variance. And you know, that may not be all that important to you, but if you want to consistently have that big red juicy tomato that is resistant to certain pests and grows really well in your garden, you want that from year to year. And you may end up with some plants or some fruit that just don't have those characteristics, even though they came from that same plant that you saved seeds from. So again, hybrids are created through specific crossings of different and distinct inbred lines. Their first offspring, the F1, will be great, and that's usually the seeds that you can buy in the store. However, each successive generation will exhibit an assortment of traits. So let's talk a little bit about how to save some seeds. A lot of people love to save seeds from tomatoes, and actually that was the very first seed I ever saved, was from tomato, because it's relatively easy to do. So I have here an example of an heirloom tomato, a Mr. Stripey. They're wonderful on a sandwich. So you save the seeds from a tomato by what is called the wet seed method. So when you're saving seeds, you want that fruit to ripen fully. You want to maybe pick a fruit that looks really good, like what you want for successive plantings, and just let it do its thing. You may be tempted to grab it and eat it, but hopefully there'll be others like it, but just save it and let it do its thing. Let it become fully ripe. If it's a pepper, let it turn red and leathery to the point where you wouldn't want to eat it, because you want those seeds to get all that energy and to plump up. So with a tomato, you'll want to scoop out the pulp and put it in a jar with a lid. And then you're going to want to add a good amount of water to it. And you want to shake it up, and then you want it to ferment for 5 days. And the reason you want to ferment, and rather than just washing them off and drying them, is that with tomato seeds and with most seeds that are kind of in these pulpy, almost in an environment that would be good for growth, there's an inhibitor on the outside of the seeds that is going to inhibit the growth. So what you want to do is you want to get rid of that, because then when you go to plant, your chances of your seeds, the majority of your seeds sprouting, are better. So let's get rid of that inhibitor by that fermentation method. And you just want to maybe mix your jar twice a day, and then any non-viable seeds or seeds that are weak will actually rise to the top of the jar in the water. And then you want to maybe remove those before you rinse them. And then at the end of the 5 days, you've removed all the floaters. You want to pour off that liquid and then rinse it through a sieve. And then spread them out on a paper plate. I like to use a paper plate because they're kind of slick and the seeds don't stick to them as much as they would like a paper towel. And you want to let them dry, but make sure with small seeds like this there are no clumps. And usually it takes a couple days to dry. And once they're fully dry, it's important that they're dry. If you're going to store them, you want them to be dry. You want to store them in a cool, dry place. So I usually label a little craft envelope. You can buy them on the internet or get them in craft stores. I'll label the type of plant it is and the year that I saved the seed. And then a refrigerator is a great place to store them because you want it to be cool. And with tomato seeds, they're viable for 3 to 6 years. I'll talk a little bit about testing your germination rate towards the end. Peppers are another plant that you would grow or you would harvest the seeds by this wet seed method. I just want to point out this right here, this Buena Mulata heirloom. That is the first type of heirloom seed that I grew. This is one of those seeds that can tell a story. It was a pepper that was widely grown in the South. It kind of died out or fell out of favor, and then somebody discovered that they had some and they started bringing them back, and now they're one of the favorite seeds to grow and save seeds for. And they're absolutely gorgeous. They're this wonderful purple color when they first appear, and then eventually they'll ripen. Most peppers turn red when they're fully ripe. Green pepper is just an immature red pepper. Fish pepper is another one that I grew for the first time this year. They're kind of fun. They're kind of striped. And then this green, hatch green hot heirloom pepper. I work at the Cleveland Clinic in research, and one of the neat things that we have is we have these outdoor terraces on either end of our research building. And we have an engagement committee, and every year people are, for $5 you can buy a little pot or a little bin that you can grow things in on the terrace. And at the end of the season, we gather what we grow and have like a potluck. And it's a great place to grow peppers. And I'm growing my hatch peppers there. And I have this one absolutely gorgeous one that I'm babying it along because that's the one I'm going to take seeds from. And it's that one right there. And this guy right now is nice and red. So in a couple of weeks, I'm going to harvest seeds from it and grow more hatch green pepper plants. So again, you allow the seeds to fully ripen, scoop them out. With these, you don't have to do that fermentation process. You don't have to necessarily rinse them, but you spread them out on a paper plate and to dry. And again, it's really important that they're dry when you store them. And just like the tomato seed, you store it in a cool, dry place, label it, and a pepper seed is usually viable for about 3 years. Beans, another great seed to save. These right here, this is a lima bean that I've grown 2 years now. They're called Snow on the Mountain, and you can see why they call them that because they have this lovely purple, but this little white part right here. And they're delicious too. They're delicious if you pick them green and cook them up, and you can dry them. They dry really well too. I've had a couple meals of the green ones, but most of mine I save and I dry. So I wanted to show you sort of the progression of what the pods look like as you allow them to dry, and then what the beans from the pods look like. So this is kind of when they start getting plump, this is what they look like. You can harvest them and eat them now, eat them then. But if you let them dry out to where they're like this, you get these lovely purple white cap beans. I swear most of the stuff that I grow I don't necessarily eat. I just grow it because I love growing it, and it's just so beautiful to watch something come from a little seed into this glorious plant. So for beans, it's the dry seed method of saving seeds. You allow them to fully ripen and dry until they turn brown, and they'll rattle in the pods. So I have a bunch of these seeds that I got from my lima bean. And you want to let them get to the point where they're rattling around in the pod, and then you can crack them open, and they're these wonderful seeds. If anybody would like some of these, you're welcome to have some to grow for next year. They're a fun bean to grow. And then once you have picked them, allow them to dry for maybe another 2 weeks inside, and store them again in a cool, dry place. And lima beans are viable for 3 years.
you say stored in a cool dry place, what do you put them in?
Again, I usually put them in a little brown craft paper envelope.
How about the tomato seeds?
Same thing, once they're dry.
Even in the refrigerator?
And even in the refrigerator, yeah. Or if you have a basement, a cool part of your basement where your cats won't get to them. That's another good place. I have kind of this like little cellar area where I do like a lot of my seed starting with my indoor greenhouse that I can stop my cats from getting in, even though they want to get in there and wreak havoc. That's another good place that I have saved seeds as well because it stays really cool down there. So lettuce. So most of the time when we eat lettuce, we're just eating the fruiting body of it. But if you actually let it go to seed, it's going to flower and you can harvest the seeds. Now this is not necessarily an easy plant to save seeds because there is chances of some cross-pollination for lettuce, but you can do it. So again, it's the dry seed method. You allow it to go to seed. The blooms will turn brown and get fuzzy and then turn white. So then you cut the stems and you invert them into a 5-gallon bucket. And then you shake and bang the stems against the side of the bucket, and the seeds should drop off into the bottom. And then you're going to have to go through the process of kind of winnowing or separating the chaff from the seed. And again, store it in a cool, dry place, label and date. And they're good for 5 to 6 years. Nasturtium is another one that I save seeds for because I put nasturtiums in my garden for 2 reasons. First one is that they're a great way to ward off certain pests. So they're a great companion plant. But they're also delicious. I don't know if anybody has eaten a nasturtium, but I highly recommend it. They have this wonderful peppery, earthy flavor. Every single part of the nasturtium plant is edible, including these right here. They're referred to as the poor man's caper, because you can brine those and it's like having capers. When I was out looking at my nasturtium plants to see if they were coming to seed so I can save them, and I have an example of some dried nasturtium seeds you're welcome to come up and take a look at that I harvested this year. Usually I'll pick them up off the ground, they'll fall from the plant and go on the ground, but when they were green like this, I was just munching on them because they're delicious. I'm into eating things. I have to be careful when it comes to mushrooms because you can always eat a mushroom once. You may not be able to eat it a second time. But again, it's the dry seed method. You allow it to fall to the ground, you collect it up off the ground, and you allow them to dry again for another 2 weeks indoors and store them in a cool place. And they're viable for 3 to 5 years. Marigold, another great companion plant that is also edible, but another great seed to save. So you allow the seed heads to dry on the plant and they get this sort of brown, potty looking thing. You snip off the dry seed heads, collect them in a paper bag, allow them to dry, and then you can store as is until you're ready to plant, or you can pull the actual seeds out of the seed pods, and you can see these are the seeds right here. And these are from some marigolds. I just did that as an example. I'm not necessarily saving these seeds because when I bought them, they were just labeled marigold, handwritten. I don't know if these are, an heirloom or not. I mean, I might save them because I just mainly put them in my garden as a companion planting, and they're beautiful. They're really nice. I remember one time my mother, who was British, actually smuggled some marigold seeds from her mother's garden in England. And she had given them to me. And I never planted them. I still have them. I might see if they're still viable, just for the heck of it. Now we're getting into some beneficial, wild, native plants that it's really good to save seeds for. And coneflower is one of those. We have coneflower growing everywhere in our yard. It's because the birds have picked them up and eaten them and then pooped them out, and they're just everywhere. So coneflower, it's the dry seed method. Again, you allow the seed heads to turn dark, cut them off, and one good way of harvesting the seeds rather than picking them out off of the prickly heads is to dump them in a coffee can with like a rock and then just shake it, and that'll dislodge the seeds from the seed heads. And then you've got to sort of sift through the chaff to collect the seeds and store them in a cool, dry place. And you can see that the seed heads, this is what they look like. You'll see these long things. Those are not the seeds. It's these right here. Those are the seeds. Now, who's to say you could grab a handful of the chaff and you're going to get some seeds in there and you can plant those. It's, you don't have to be anal like me and pick through all the little individual seeds. Common milkweed. Now, this is one that everybody should be saving seeds for, again, because of the situation with the monarch butterfly, which is one of our best pollinators out there, and they need all the help they can get. So common milkweed, this is what they look like when they're flowered, and then this is what the pods look like. When I was taking pictures, by the time I was taking pictures, all of our milkweed the flowers had gone, and they formed these pods. We'll go out and we'll look for the caterpillars, thank you, on all of our milkweeds. And if we find them, this year I bought a little tent for keeping caterpillars in. Caterpillars are choice food for a lot of birds that you'll get in your garden if you have a lot of these wonderful plants growing. So I don't know what the percentage is of the number of caterpillars that actually make it to the point of becoming a butterfly. Linda, do you know?
It's very low.
It's really, yeah. 3%, yeah. So I figured if I find them, I'm going to provide them a little home so they can do their thing and hopefully grow into a beautiful monarch butterfly, and then I'll release them in my garden. So these pods, I'm sure we've all seen them. They'll eventually dry and break open, and this is what the milkweed seed looks like. I'm also constantly amazed about the differences in different seeds, how the seeds themselves are so beautiful, and they're so different depending on the plant that they come from. Again, it's the dry seed method. You allow the seed heads to turn brown and crack open, and then you collect the seed heads. One thing you can do is kind of when you have the pod like this, is you hold it up by the end that is attached to the plant, and you kind of hit it with your hand, and that loosens the seeds inside, and then you can open the seed pod and then pour out the seeds. Store in a cool, dry place, and they're viable for 3 years. The thing about milkweed seeds is that they need cold stratification. So I would suggest actually once you have harvested them and they're dry, plant them in the fall and let them chill out in the ground over the winter. They'll get that cold stratification and then hopefully produce wonderful milkweed. And it's easy to grow. When I am mowing what little lawn we have left, because all of our yard is being taken over by native plants at this point, which is a good thing, but I'm constantly mowing over popped up milkweeds in my yard. I'll check them for caterpillars first, but if I had to save every milkweed that popped up in my yard, I wouldn't be here right now. Swamp milkweed, another type of milkweed that grows in sort of wet areas, and it gets these beautiful flowers. Seed pods are kind of similar, shaped a little bit different, but that's another good native plant to save seeds for. Cup plant, I don't know if you're at all familiar with cup plant. We have a rain garden in our house, which is right there. And cup plant is a plant that gets these gorgeous yellow flowers, and they grow really, really tall. But what's really neat, where the leaves are coming off of the main stem, they form a cup and it holds water. And a lot of times that's a great place for insects to get a drink. A place for a small amphibia to hang out as well. They're fairly easy to save seeds for, and this is what the seeds look like from a cup plant. And the same dry seed method for collecting those seeds. A lot of these wild seeds or wild plants, you can just basically cut off the seed heads, put them in a container, shake them. You don't have to pick them out yourself, and then just sift through the chaff to collect the seeds. And they're viable for about 2 to 3 years. Another one that needs cold stratification, like their cousin, the common milkweed. So I've gone over some seeds that you can save. By far the easiest seeds to save are things like a tomato seed or a bean seed. And then depending on, you can see on that list, depending on their type of pollination, they get a little bit difficult. And what I mean by difficult is if you have a plant that is prone to cross-pollination, you may, if you have, let's say, 2 different types of squash in your garden, they may cross-pollinate with each other. So you don't know unless you're out there, you know, with a little paintbrush and pollinating them yourself by removing the pollen from one part and putting it on the other, and then putting a little mesh bag around it so nothing can touch it, but you're not sure if the seeds that are produced on those plants are going to be true to type. But you know, again, if you just want to do it because you think it's fun and you're going to eat it no matter if it looks mutant or not, you know, go ahead and do it. So, how to check the germination rate? So you have these seeds, they've maybe been around for a year or two. You want to know, like, if you have, you know, which ones are going to pollinate. So you can do this really quick test. You basically get about 20 to 50 random seeds, and you spread them on a moistened paper towel. You don't want them to touch, and then just carefully roll that paper towel up, and then place them in a plastic bag and keep it in a warm place in your house. And you want to check the seeds every 2 to 3 days for about a week. And when you see them start to sprout, maybe 7 to 8 days after, you can basically, it's simple math. You count the ones that sprouted, compare that to the ones that didn't, and you can create a germination rate. If your germination rate is around 90%, that's great. 70 to 80% is acceptable. 50 or lower is usually too low for most species, but I've been known to take any seed and plant it to see what I get. Sometimes you're surprised. So, now, some resources for seed banks. We're sitting in one of the best resources right now. The Mentor Library has a seed library. You're free to come in and check out seeds if you would like. You're also free, I remember I think it was a couple years ago, there was a day where people were encouraged to bring in their seeds and actually donate it to the seed library. Cleveland Public Library also has it, and then of course the Holden Seed Bank, as you could imagine, has a seed bank. And then there's also the Cleveland Seed Bank. And I'm sure there's other regional seed banks, but these are the main ones, and I really like the Mentor Library one. Yes?
I think Eastlake has one too, right?
Does Eastlake?
Yeah, I say Little Eastlake Library System has one.
Really? Great. Okay. Just do an internet search for local seed banks. So, great place for heirloom seeds. If you want to buy heirloom seeds, Baker Creek is usually my go-to place. Now, they're not called bakercreek.com, they're rareseeds.com. Took me a while to figure that out. So it's like I'm on this rare seeds, but wait a minute, I'm looking for Baker Creek. So, M.I. Gardner, and he's a great, migardner.com also sells heirloom seeds. I do watch a lot of YouTube videos on gardening. And the M.I. Gardner, M.I. stands for Michigan, so they're not far away from us. He has a lot of great resources for all types of gardening, especially vegetable gardening. Hudson Valley Seed Company, Botanical Interest, Tradewind Fruits, Seeds of Change, and that's the same Seeds of Change you see in the grocery store that sell those little rice or grain mixes. They also sell seeds. And then Annie's Heirloom Seeds. This is by no means the only place that you can get heirloom seeds, but Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds sells nothing but heirloom seeds. So you can trust their seeds. That's where I get a lot of my fun variety of beans and pepper seeds, is from Baker Creek. These are just citations. I don't expect you to read them. I just need to put them there so you know I'm not ripping anybody off with the information. Final quote here is, all man has to do is cooperate with the big forces, the sun, the rain, the growing urge. Seeds sprout, stems grow, leaves spread in the sunlight. Man plants, weeds, cultivates, and harvests. It sounds simple, and it's simple with the simplicity of great truths. Thank you.